On the morning of the Pearl Harbor attack, the man who planned it already knew that Japan had just signed its own death warrant. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was dead for over 2 years when the prediction he made in 1940 finally came true. As Japanese officials stood aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, they finally saw what Yamamoto had warned them about for years. They were surrounded by over 300 ships and 900 aircraft, a thundering display of the industrial machine that had crushed the empire. What those officials witnessed was not just a military defeat, but visible proof that their leaders had known about America's overwhelming power all along and chose to ignore it. This is the story of what the Japanese High Command said about American firepower, both before the first bomb fell and after it was too late to matter. The warning began with Yamamoto, a man who understood the United States better than perhaps any other officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Between 1919 and 1921, he studied at Harvard University, immersing himself in American society and observing the daily lives of ordinary people. He learned to play poker and bridge, games that taught him vital lessons about the American psyche. He saw that Americans were aggressive risk-takers who calculated odds and played to win, people who did not accept defeat gracefully. Beyond psychology, he studied economics and the oil industry, recognizing that petroleum was the bloodline of modern warfare. He saw a society of abundance that seemed impossible to someone from resource-poor Japan. In America, luxuries were treated as necessities, and factories operated on a scale that dwarfed anything in Asia. Yamamoto traveled extensively, visiting automobile plants in Detroit, where Ford and General Motors produced vehicles at rates that seemed like magic. A single American plant could produce more cars in a month than all of Japan could in a year. In Texas, he saw oil fields pumping more petroleum in a month than Japan held in its entire strategic reserve. In Pennsylvania, he watched steel mills pour rivers of molten metal 24 hours a day. Pittsburgh alone manufactured more steel than the entire Japanese empire. He realized that without steel and oil, there could be no modern navy. After returning home, he repeatedly warned his government about underestimating this industrial titan. In 1940, he told Prime Minister Konoe that if ordered to fight, he could run wild for 6 months to a year, but if the war continued beyond that, he had no expectation of success. Yamamoto bluntly told his colleagues that anyone who had seen the factories of Detroit and the oil fields of Texas knew that Japan could not win a naval race with America. He even argued that to truly defeat the United States, Japan would have to march into Washington and sign a treaty in the White House. He wasn't boasting, he was pointing out that such a feat was physically impossible. Despite these warnings, he remained a loyal officer. When the decision for war was finalized, he designed the Pearl Harbor attack to buy Japan time. On December 7, 1941, his strike force achieved total surprise, sinking or damaging 18 ships and killing over 2,400 Americans. While his pilots celebrated a stunning victory, Yamamoto was subdued. He knew the American carriers had escaped, and more importantly, he knew the sneak attack had united a divided American nation in a fury that Japan could not comprehend. For the next 6 months, Japan swept across the Pacific and Southeast Asia with record-breaking speed. They captured Wake Island, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. The rising sun flag flew over 400 million people, and the military leaders basked in glory. But Yamamoto was counting the days, knowing his window of opportunity was closing. The turning point came exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor at the Battle of Midway. Yamamoto had planned a decisive engagement to destroy the remaining American carriers, but the Americans had broken the Japanese naval code. They knew the attack was coming. Even the damaged carrier Yorktown, which should have taken 90 days to repair, was returned to sea in just 72 hours thanks to the American industrial grit Yamamoto had feared. At Midway, the Japanese lost 4 fleet carriers and over 3,000 men in a single day.
The prophecy of 6 months of victory had been fulfilled to the very day. From that point forward, Japan was forced into a defensive war it could not sustain. While Japan struggled to replace every lost ship and pilot, American industry was just reaching its full potential. By 1943, American shipyards were launching a new carrier every month and a new destroyer every 4 days. They built over 2,700 Liberty ships to keep the supply lines full. Japanese pilots, who once dominated the skies, now faced endless waves of superior aircraft like the Hellcat and the Corsair. These American planes were built with armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, prioritizing pilot survival, while the agile Japanese Zeros were easily set ablaze.
The disparity extended to the ground as well. During the battle for Guadalcanal, Emperor Hirohito asked why American forces could build airfields in days while Japanese crews took a month. The answer was simple. Americans used machines, while the Japanese worked by hand. Japan was fighting a war of manpower against a nation of machines. On Guadalcanal, Japanese soldiers starved and died of tropical diseases because their supply lines were severed by American firepower. They charged into machine gun fire with bravery that meant nothing against inexhaustible ammunition. By 1943, when the Japanese finally evacuated, they had lost 20,000 men, mostly to starvation. This pattern repeated across the Pacific, Japanese determination versus American material. In June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, effectively ended the Japanese carrier force. American radar and superior training allowed their pilots to destroy over 350 Japanese aircraft in a single day. The Japanese pilots were now mostly novices with minimal flight hours because Japan lacked the fuel to train them. American pilots described the battle as being as easy as shooting fish in a barrel. Soon after, the fall of Saipan put Tokyo within range of the new B-29 bombers. The strategic assumption that the home islands were safe was shattered. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, defending the Philippines, found himself isolated without radios or vehicles, while American troops received regular mail and even ice cream at the front lines. The final year of the war brought the destruction Yamamoto had envisioned. Systematic firebombing raids reduced Japan's major cities to ashes. On a single night in March 1945, over 100,000 people died in the firestorm in Tokyo. Japan's industrial capacity collapsed as workers fled and raw materials vanished. In a desperate move, Japan turned to kamikaze suicide attacks. While these strikes caused casualties, they could not stop the momentum. For every ship damaged, the Americans had 10 more waiting. The invasion of Okinawa showed that naval gunfire from American ships could deliver more explosive power in a day than the entire Japanese Navy possessed. Despite being utterly defeated by the summer of 1945, the Japanese military leadership still refused to surrender, preparing for a final suicidal defense of the homeland. That resistance was met with the ultimate demonstration of industrial and scientific power, the Manhattan Project. The United States had invested $2 billion to build a weapon Japan could not even imagine. On August 6th and August 9th, atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These weapons illustrated the total disparity between the two nations. Some military leaders still wanted to fight, but Emperor Hirohito finally intervened to end the suffering. He told his people that the war situation had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, and that they must endure the unendurable. On the deck of the Missouri, as General MacArthur presided over the signing, the visual proof of Yamamoto's warning was everywhere. The massive fleet in the harbor was the physical manifestation of the factories in Detroit and the oil in Texas. After the war, interrogated Japanese officers, including Mitsuo Fuchida, admitted that their cause had been hopeless from the start. They confessed that the attack on Pearl Harbor had been a strategic blunder that awakened a sleeping giant. They described their despair as they watched Japanese ships appear on the horizon, each carrying more ammunition than a Japanese command would see in a month. They realized that courage and the warrior spirit were insufficient against an enemy that could bury them in steel.
The tragedy of the Pacific War was not a lack of information. Yamamoto had provided precise, accurate warnings based on his expertise, but his words were ignored because they were politically inconvenient. The leaders in Tokyo chose to believe in divine destiny over material facts, and millions paid the price for that willful blindness. Yamamoto's story remains a haunting lesson that expertise means nothing if those in power refuse to listen. If you found this account of the Pacific War valuable, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We are dedicated to bringing you accurate historical content based on verified sources and documented testimony. Share this video with others who appreciate history from multiple perspectives, and leave a comment telling us which aspect of World War II you would like us to explore next. Your support allows us to continue producing educational content that brings important historical lessons to new audiences.